Yeah. And so how can educators emphasize stories of agency, resistance, and joy when teaching these kind of difficult histories and difficult topics around race in America?
You know, I would say just first you have to acknowledge that when talking about use African Americans as an example, but really any oppressed people, right? Any historically marginalized people, there is never a time where they're not resisting oppression. There's never a time. When you look at the African American experience, one of the core characteristics is the persistence of resistance. You look at the experience of indigenous folk, they're constantly fighting, right? Women constantly fighting, right? To say, okay, how do we do this right now? I mean, so there's never a time where you have marginalized groups who aren't fighting. And so for me, I like to lead with resistance, right? It's like, no. If we're talking about African Americans, talking about Native Americans, we're gonna lead with resistance. Before I even talk about slavery, right? And the fine points, because they're bringing in their own beliefs. I need you to connect with the humanity of these marginalized groups, with oppressed groups. And the way kids connect with it in many ways is one of the leading ways is through resistance, right? Because they have their own egos. Well, if this was happening to me, then I would fight back. It's like, all right, let me show you some fighting back, right? Now, one, you wouldn't, right? Not in that way, but let me give you some, right? So you can connect through the resistance, and then we can explain and create the complexity. So I think resistance is absolutely critical, right? To not just more than sort of like connecting, to sort of empathy, so they can be empathetic, but to recognize the humanity, right? Because that's how many will sort of see, well, if I was in this situation, I would do that, and then why didn't they do that? Well, here's the reason why you don't have more slave revolts, right? That doesn't mean that they accepted the position. That means they're resisting in other ways. The question isn't why weren't there more? The question is why were there any, given the obstacles that were arrayed? And so I think talking about resistance and teaching resistance and explaining it and complicating it, right? From slavery in the context of African Americans to the civil rights era into the present, the ways in which African Americans are continuing to organize to end mass incarceration, to end the war on drugs, all these other things, is so fundamentally important, because you can get students to recognize the humanity of the people, right, that we're talking about. And if you can do that, then they can begin to take them seriously in the decisions that they make.
I just second everything you just said. I don't have anything to add. You took it